Hello, my name is Paul Gregory. Welcome to the platform updates for the Skillable platforms during October 2024. So hopefully we can walk through the changes that we've made, give you a couple of little demonstrations of some of the things that have been going on. First of all, we did make a change to the Skillable training management system, and we added a new option when you create a course which are attached to lab activities. So you create a course, you add Skillable Labs to the course, and there was a new checkbox that was added. And this checkbox said allow to mark lab complete if available. So really what this means is before we had this option, if a user took a lab and they exited the lab without actually completing the whole lab, the user got an option to say, would you like to mark this lab as complete? So they could tick the box to mark the lab as complete. Okay. Some customers sort of reported back and they would like to prevent a user from doing that. They would like a user to only be able to effectively have their lab marked as complete if they've completed all the lab by ticking all the task boxes and then getting to the very end and basically submitting the lab. So we added this new tick box. So effectively, if the box is not ticked, if a user ends a lab, either by saving it or by cancelling the lab, obviously the lab being saved will go into a save state, and then if the save expires, the lab will actually then cancel out and it won't be marked as complete. If the user hits exit, they will only have an option to cancel the lab. They won't have an option to complete the lab. If you put the tick in the box, as we've got here, that would allow a user, when they hit the sort of end option, to say, yes, please mark my lab as complete. So it's a really simple, really straightforward option to actually sort of configure as part of your classes that you actually go and sell, your courses that you set up. So here I am in the Skillable TMS. If I was to go and create a course, so I'm not too worried about all the other features in here, but if we come across to activities and we add a lab, I'll just pick a lab. Doesn't really matter what I actually pick on. You can see that I've now got this box ticked. So you'll notice that it's ticked by default. So that maintains the same functionality that the labs had before we introduced this option. So to get this feature where if a user doesn't complete the lab by going all the way to the end of it, and then removing the option to mark it as complete, then you can take the tick out of the box. So if they hit the end option in the lab client, they won't be prompted to say mark this lab as complete. They will only basically get it cancelled out on them. Okay, so pretty straightforward option to go and set that capability. Okay, so that's the thing that's changed during October in the Skillable TMS. If we now think of Studio, there's been quite a lot of changes with respect to some of the initial experiences within Studio. So on the last Lab Developer Workshop that I presented in September, we talked about the new template gallery, we talked about the new templates that we're building and those sort of things. We've now released the new wizard. So if I go into Studio, if I was to hit create new and I was to pick a template, then we have a new wizard for this. Now, this new wizard presents a number of benefits and features depending on what you actually pick within the wizard. Okay, so one of the great things to start off with is, even though the templates we've got sort of in the box here are pretty simple, pretty straightforward templates, let's pick a cyber security template here. So if I come down to security, okay, you'll notice we've got this template here, which is actually for being able to do cybersecurity training for web developers and penetration testers for web applications. Now, quite often when people do cybersecurity training, they might use a product like Kali or Parrot, and most organizations have a preference to the technology they use. So what we're starting to do is actually put both of those into our cybersecurity templates. Okay, so if I now hit create on here, this will now start the new wizard. So it's a little bit longer than it was before, but we think you get some value from the functionality. So we still have the new license agreement page, so we can agree to that. You can put in your name, any sort of short name or number that you want to put in here, your description, all those standard features. So that's really similar to where we was before. What we now get this ability to do, though, is we now get the ability to then pick what resources we want to have in the lab. This being a VM-based lab, and this would be the same for a container-based lab. So let's say I'm an organization that uses Parrot for our penetration testing application. I could then just take the tick out the Kali box. So when this goes and builds a lab profile for me, I will only get the buggy web application VM and the Parrot security one. If I was a Kali house, then ultimately I could tick Kali and remove the tick from Parrot. Okay. Now, one of the things that this becomes really powerful for is for organizations that create their own templates. So imagine, for example, creating a super lab profile. So you create one lab profile, and in that lab profile, you put all of the different sort of operational VMs that your training courses are based on. Okay. And then the idea is, from the user's point of view, they could actually pick this one template, and then they could just select the specific VMs they need. So that really enables organizations to, first and foremost, minimize their maintenance. They've got one lab profile which contains all the resources in, maybe a couple, depending if they use Hyper-V and ESX and so on. But ultimately, just one or two lab profiles that has all their resources in. Okay, one place to maintain, one place to keep on top of everything. Okay, but the lab developers also then have a known source for actually going off and making sure they're getting the latest versions of all the VMs when they're creating a new course, with the latest versions of the apps in and all those sort of things. So this can really streamline that whole process. So imagine, as an organization creating this lab profile, let's say with 20 VMs in it, and then literally the lab developer comes in here and says, right, here they're the 4 that I want. They get rid of all the others. These are just the 4, and we build a lab profile with that combination. So that becomes, really powerful. And again, in here, if you wanted to, you do have the ability to change the size of the resource as well. Make it larger, make it smaller. So again, really, you're getting a much quicker starting point when you're building the environment. One of the other things that's really powerful with this is actually what we've done with respect to cloud environments. So we do see this as being potentially something we're going to be using more than maybe you would directly. But if I hit the create new, and this time I go and pick a cloud-based template. So let's go and find a public template for Azure. Okay, you'll basically see most of these, basically we're working on this empty model. We're going to give you a template that doesn't really have much in it. There's a couple of exceptions like these AI ones, just because they're slightly different. And the idea is we can now add resource templates as a gallery option. Okay, so the whole idea now is if I hit create on here, looks like the same wizard. The only core difference is we now got cloud configuration as opposed to VM configuration. So when I hit agree, same page as before, we can move on from there. We then get the cloud configuration. So yes, I can go and pick my subscription. So pretty straightforward. I can pick a subscription. Okay, but what I can now do is I can now add cloud resources from a set of templates. Now we've looked at all the things that people build on our platform there. So remember, these templates, we talked about this in the last lab developer workshop, represent the resources that you want to be built as part of the lab launch. So these are not the things the user's going to do. These are the resources that we're going to build on launch. Okay, so I could come in here, for example, and we have some off-the-shelf standard components. So we often see people want to build storage accounts. They want to build networking. They might want to build something like a website, things along those lines. Okay, so I'm just going to pick a storage account entry in here. Okay. And then close that window down. So at this point, you can see that it's got the storage account object in here. If I now actually hit that drop down box, okay, it actually allows me to specify any parameter values that I need to specify. Now, parameters might be required, or that they might be optional. Now, obviously, from the point of view of creating a storage account in Azure, if you're familiar with this, there are some compulsory parameters, things like what do you want to call the storage account. So what we've done is we have defaulted all of those values. So if I hover over this, okay, this will say basically enter the storage account name. The name must be unique with all lowercase letters and numbers only. But we're also saying we have set a default, which is lab SA, and then we're using the @lab token lab instance.id. So when you spin this up, you're going to create a storage account. It's going to be called lab SA at lab.labinstance.id. Okay. And if that default is okay for you, then you can just leave that, press next, and away you go. Of course, if you want to customize this, then you can actually come in here and customize it. So just imagine, for example, you've got a naming convention where it's going to be something like SA, then you're going to put region, so East US, and then you've got some other identifier. So maybe I'll put my initials in here, and then you might also then put an @lab in here. So @lab.lab instance ID. And notice we've got the IntelliSense popping up so that you can actually find those tokens much easier. You don't have to sort of struggle with them. The other thing to note is you can add more than one template. So if I wanted to also create a VNet, I could come in here and I could hit add on now, okay, and I could then come in and I could configure the VNet settings. Again, exactly the same concept as before. These have defaults, but you could absolutely go in there and change those defaults if you wanted to. Okay, so we've tried to make that much easier for people to be able to get started building cloud-based lab environments as well. Okay, trying to make that much easier for people to get started that way. Okay, well, also when we think about new features, okay, one of the other places that we've been doing a lot of work recently, and it's been in beta, is the instructions editor. We've talked about this a lot over this year on the lab developer workshops. So great news, end of October, the instructions editor went general availability. That doesn't mean we're finished. It just means basically we've enabled it for every customer. We're really happy with where we are from a feature functionality. We absolutely believe we've reached a minimum viable product. It doesn't have every piece of functionality in it yet, and we're getting there, and it will do. But we think that for the majority of customers, it actually meets the criteria that they need. Okay, so that's the first thing. So from that point of view, really happy about that. But as I say, innovation's not stopping with the new instructions editor. Okay, we've actually made quite a lot of changes to the instructions editor as part of the GA release. Okay, some of these were direct customer feedback. So for example, you could do Control Z to undo things, but there was no support for Control Y to redo, to do the same thing a second time, for example. So we did that. Obviously, spell checker has been a big request for people in our instructions editor for a long time. So we've got spell checker in there, but we've got many other things as well. So if I go into a lab profile, okay, so I've just got a lab profile here. If I choose to go and edit this instructions for this particular lab profile, okay, we can see we've got the new instruction editor. If you need to fall back to what we call the legacy editor now, you can absolutely do that. There's no problems at all. To be honest, if you would prefer to work in the markdown and things along those lines, I would generally recommend that you sort of go for code view and you actually work within the code view environment. Now, you might sit there going, well, if I go in the new instructions editor and I've got to press the code view button, that's just extra clicks. That's not making life simpler for me. That's not making life easier for me. Okay. Well, actually, if you go to the settings menu, okay, we have a couple of options here. So do you want to turn the learner preview on or off? Do you want to sync the preview page? Do you want to set the code editor as the default? So this will actually set the code editor as the default. There's a little question mark here. So ultimately, we're just sort of telling you obviously what this is going to do. Bear in mind, this is actually stored in a cookie. So if you ever do things like clear all the cookies out of your browser and so on, you will need to come back in here and set that. Okay. And again, we've got the spell checker, so you can turn that on and off if you want to. So pretty useful feature there to give you that sort of starting experience. We have cleaned up quite a lot of the elements around the display a little bit, so I think this is just a little bit tidier. It just presents a bit better than what we had. I think it just really sort of this sort of what you see is what you get view is much closer to actually the view on the right hand side. Other key things that we've done, we did discover that a lot of people were struggling with this menu down the left hand side, so you can now see that we've added tooltips, so it becomes much easier for you to actually understand which one. We have found a lot of users were going, oh, which one is it I want, and they'd click and they'd work their way through until they found the one they wanted. So tooltips just makes that much easier. The other feature that we've actually added in here for the GA was no support for actually adding images and things into the instructions. If you wanted to add images, you sort of either had to go to sort of code view or go to the legacy editor and things along those lines. So there is now a upload media dialog. So it's the same dialog as we had before, okay, but it's now pulled straight into the new visual editor, so making that a lot easier. Other places that we've actually made some improvements to the usability. If you do things like go into the type text box, so let's say I want to add some type text in here, okay, this now has support for the @labs, so you can do things like @lab. When you hit the dot, you'll get the @lab list come back and things, so that sort of thing. So those dialog boxes have got that capability put in and so on. Okay, so hopefully brilliant. Now, one of the things you might come across, you absolutely might come across labs with the instructions are still a little bit too complex for this. So what will actually happen is you'll get a little pop-up box and it will tell you that you can't edit these instructions inside the current visual editor, and it will put you straight into code view. Okay, and then you can work on those instructions there. But the other great thing about that is that then effectively logs something at our end, so our developers can then actually see, oh, so we've got customers that have got instructions that the new visual editor can't handle, so we need to go and investigate why that is, what the problem is, and then obviously resolve that type of problem. So I'd just like to show you that, just so that if you see this dialog box, there's no panic or anything along those lines. So I'm just going to come over to my dashboard, for example, where I've got some sort of demo labs, and we've got some stuff that sort of exhibits that sort of particular feature. So if I go in here and hit the edit instructions, okay, hopefully this comes up with that box. So ultimately, there's an issue with the instructions that prevents them from displaying in the visual editor, but you can still use the code editor. And you'll see that when I press OK, it takes me straight into the code editor. Okay. Now you might be wondering there, what's actually the problem with this? Okay, it's actually because these have got HTML in the instructions. Okay, so the new editor doesn't like HTML at this moment in time. Okay, cool. So just a lot of things about the new features that we actually have in the instruction editor. A couple of other things I would like to highlight in terms of new features that we've actually released in the platform. Just bear with me for a second. I'll wait for my slide to switch over. Oh, there we go. A feature we don't talk about an awful lot, and I'm going to do a session on this in the new year, is something called the consumption rule engine. We refer to it as the CRE engine. So this allows us to apply settings en masse. So for example, we can apply a setting based on an organization, or we can apply a setting based on an API consumer. So imagine, for example, you've got a set of labs which have actually got are used across different API consumers, and they're maybe targeting different audiences. So maybe you want different themes. So if they launch it from API consumer A, you want theme A. If they launch it across API consumer B, you want theme B, and so on. Well, in the really old days, the way you do that is you'd basically have to duplicate every lab profile, okay, and then you'd have to attach different themes to them. Well, we can do that as a rule. So we could actually create a consumption rule that says, for example, if a lab's launched across this API consumer, apply this theme to it. Okay, so we could do those sorts of things. So this is a great feature which we don't let customers have access to. We don't talk about it an awful lot, but in reality, we should sort of use this extensively more. Hence the reason we need to do a session on this. But one of the rules that we have introduced, especially for those customers that are very security conscious, is just a global rule which allows you to disable clipboard redirect. So effectively stopping people being able to copy and paste into the lab environment. You can only copy and paste text, but this effectively prevents that from actually happening. So we have some security sensitive customers that use the Skillable Challenge Labs. Some of the Skillable Challenge Labs allow copy and paste. So they said, oh, we need that to be disabled because we can't afford Skillable to be a data leak protection issue, like a route out of our network. So we've just built a simple rule that allows us to sort of say, if this customer launches these labs, disable this component. It disables the keyboard redirect. The last thing I just want to talk about is about scaled scoring. So this is a feature that's gone into beta. If you're interested in it, please feel free to reach out to us and have a talk about it. So in reality, we perceive scaled scoring as being very much a feature for high stakes exam scenarios. Okay, so what is scaled scoring? So if we think about creating a PBT on the Skillable platform, as you create activities, you would give them scores. So you might say you get 5 points for this, you get 10 points for this, and what you would effectively do is you would determine a pass mark. Okay, you might need to get 35 points out of 50 to pass that, and that's okay. Okay, however, in reality, to maintain, especially in high stakes scenarios, to maintain exam integrity and so on, you need to change the exam periodically. You're going to take questions out, you're going to add questions in, you maybe change some of the things that you need to do. If you think about exams that are taken as part of education, whether that's younger children in the various key stages or university exams or whatever these might be, okay, you never get the same exam paper twice. Okay, so one of the things they need to do is they need to make sure that regardless of the number of questions, regardless of the difficulty, if some questions have become more difficult or easier than before, that everyone's graded across the same scale. So therefore, everyone's marks are directly translatable to each other. And that's what scaled scoring effectively does. So even if you adjust what we call the raw score for every object, the scale scoring system will still keep the same level. Everyone will be marked based on the same sort of scaled score. If anyone's, for example, taken something like a Microsoft exam, an AWS exam, a Google exam, any of those types of sort of technical certification exams, they're normally marked out of 1,000. Okay, and there's normally a pass mark. So for Microsoft, for example, I can say the pass mark is always 700. Okay, but the exam might actually only be scored out of 50 points. Okay, you might get 1 point per question, and you do 50 questions, for example. But they would then scale the results up based on the scaled scoring system. So if you're not familiar with this and you might be interested in it, certainly recommend go and read something like assess.com scaled scoring and actually have a look at what they've got to say about it. There's some detailed explanations of sort of how this would work. The key thing is, from our platform's point of view, okay, as a lab developer, you will generally create your labs the same way as you always have done. So you will basically go off, create your activities, put your scores against them, all those sort of things. But one of the things that we would do, or we can enable you to do, is you can set up scaled scoring. So effectively, against the organization where the lab profiles are stored, you can effectively define a minimum score, a maximum score, and what that passing score is going to be. And then the idea is our system, when someone takes an exam, it will actually look at the points you're allocating in the exam and actually adjust people's scores to fit into the scaled scoring system. Okay, so that's the idea behind this. And it's then the scaled scoring that's actually presented to the user. Okay, because in reality, the raw score is not relevant to the user. It's how did they do on the scaled score system. So obviously, very much a quick introduction. Obviously, a lot more detail behind this. If anyone's sort of going down this area and really interested in this capability, then again, please reach out to your account exec. We can get the appropriate people to sort of have a conversation with you about the scaled scoring capability. Just as a quick thing, this is currently beta. So ultimately, you're more than welcome to reach out to us, join the beta if this is something that you'd like to get involved with. No problems at all there. Okay, so I think that sort of basically brings me to the end of the updates that we've got. So obviously, if there's any questions, always please feel free to reach out to me, paul.gregory@skillable.com. Reach out to support, reach out to your account exec, reach out to your customer success manager about any of these new features. So thank you very much for watching this short sort of 25-minute video. Have a great day. Speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.